Bem-vindo ao Famílias Bilíngues, um podcast promovido pelo GEALIN, Grupo de Estudos em Aquisição da Linguagem da Unesp de Araraquara, em parceria com o Programa Institucional de Internacionalização CAPES-Print. Olá a todos, sejam bem-vindos a mais um podcast Famílias Bilíngues, promovidos pelo GEALIN, Grupo de Aquisição da Linguagem de Araraquara. Meu nome é Paula Bulho e eu sou pesquisadora de bilinguismo e hoje eu estou com uma convidada muito especial, a professora Aliyah. Ela está em Paris e por isso o nosso podcast de hoje vai ser em inglês. Hello, Aliyah, welcome.
Hello, Paula. Nice to see you.
So, Aliyah, I would like if you could tell us a bit about your family, the languages that you speak, the environment.
Mm-hmm. So I was born in the United States. My mother is American and my father was French. They met in Jerusalem and they did not speak the same language. My mother spoke only English and Hebrew, and my father spoke French and very, very little English at the time. He was a mathematician, and my mother just fell in love with him. We never found out if my father fell in love on the spot, but they got married when they were quite young. And I was born 9.5 months later in the United States. But my mother finished her BA, and they moved to France when I was just a few months old. So I was raised in France, in Nice, in the south of France, with a father who always spoke French to me, and a mother who always spoke English to me. So they were the two languages at home. And then my grandparents, the ones who were living in France, my grandmother was Turkish, but her native language was Ladino, which is more like Spanish. And but she also spoke very good French. Because it was like the language of the aristocracy, of the people who had an education. And my grandfather was Polish, and he spoke about 12 languages. So he did speak French. So my grandparents were kind of francophone. My father spoke French, and when my grandmother from the United States visited, we spoke English with her, but she spoke a lot of Yiddish. So it was quite multilingual, but basically I was raised speaking French and English at the dinner table and during my day, French in school. And, that's, we had family in Israel. I had family in Italy because my aunt was Italian. So that's why I learned Italian. So it was, we were quite open to languages, I must say.
Yeah, that's very interesting because the other people that we had here in the podcast, most of them were talking about their children, but not about themselves.
Okay. So I understood your question as my own childhood.
No. Yes. And how did you feel?
My children. I married a French husband, and I would say, so I'm pretty much bilingual, but my stronger language is French. And so we spoke French at home. And so I was, when I was pregnant with my daughter, I didn't know which language I would speak to her because my mother had spoken English to me. And so when I was pregnant, I would speak to the baby in both languages. And I would sing in English and I would speak more in French maybe. And when the baby was in my arms, I just spoke French. I mean, a little bit of English, but mostly French. And so I was a little bit sad that I wasn't using English with my daughter. But I felt like I needed to speak the language I felt more comfortable with. And then my daughter was automatically American. And when she became old enough, like just before she became a teenager, when she was 11, she really wanted to be bilingual. She always had English around her because there are always people speaking English, sleeping over. My mother is American and we speak English together, but she spoke a lot of French to the children to be understood. But at some point, things switched completely, and my daughter just became bilingual through contact with American family, but also through wanting to be bilingual. She got really interested in American series. So she had all this English, and I must say, I think she understands popular English better than me, because, the American series, they go very, very fast. And then my son, it was a little bit slower, but he caught on, and I'm around 16, 17, it just suddenly clicked, and he became American too, because for him, we had to go to the States and get the dual nationality. And now he speaks really good English. He spent 1 year doing his master's in England. So even if it's a different accent. So my children were not raised bilingual, at least they're not simultaneous bilinguals. But my daughter, you can't hear it. My son, a little bit more, but he's pretty fluent.
Okay. And how did you feel as a child being around so many languages? Do you remember?
I remember that I liked switching. I liked code switching. I liked code mixing. I liked this freedom of going from one to the other. But I also remember that when I was a teenager, I did not have I was not skilled enough in English to fight with my mother. And I remember that I would just not talk to her so much. And so what happened, because we spoke English, I never, ever spoke French to her. So if I wanted to have an argument, it had to be in English. And so when I was 16, my mother's a children's writer. And when I was 16, she decided that since we never talked out our conflicts, we would write a book about them. So we wrote a book for teenagers called Terminal, tout le monde descend. So terminal is the last grade of high school. And there's a phrase in French, terminus, tout le monde descend, that you say at the end of a bus line when everybody has to go off the bus. And so it was a way of saying, well, last year of a high school, everybody goes down, descend is finished. And so it was that about the last year of high school, but it was about our conflicts. And so she wrote her version, and I wrote my version of the same event. Like when I took her clothes, or when I got a bad grade and cried, and she was mad at me because I cried, or things like that. And we got a prize for that book. So we were able to have a dialogue in French, because we wrote the book in French. But it was more difficult to actually, confront, to talk about those conflicts in English.
But do you believe it was because of the language, Aliyah,
Well,
that you had?
That's my representation. I mean, that's how I remember it. And and I think that's the reason I didn't speak English to my daughter, because I was remembering that it was not as easy to fight, to have arguments. Not when the kids are kids. I had the ability in English to do enough scaffolding, to do enough transmission, but I was kind of anticipating what it would be like to argue about important matters, and I didn't feel I would have been capable of doing that with her.
Okay. Oh, that's very, very interesting. And so you said that your children, they decided to speak English by themselves.
Yes. And I always tell parents who ask me, because since I'm a professor in language acquisition, a lot of people want their children to be bilingual. I always tell them that they should speak the language that they, in their guts, feel comfortable with, because that's the most important, is the relationship. It's great to know several languages. It's wonderful. It's a great treasure. It's enriching, but it shouldn't be at the cost of your relationship with your parents or with your children.
Yeah, yes, yes. And your father always spoke in French with you?
Yes, but his English became much better. He had an accent, but he could really communicate very well with my family. My American family did not speak French, and my husband speaks very good English. So when with my mother, we only speak English. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
my father, when we were at the dinner table, it was really the two languages. We answered in English to my mother, in French to my father, and they did not mix. Each spoke their language. Actually, my mother did not speak French when she arrived in France. She did not speak a
Mm-hmm.
word. So it was her only way to communicate. And then she became fluent in French, but she continued to speak English to my father.
Okay. And then, was there any try or to bring cultural aspects more than only the language?
Yes.
But yeah,
So
what
first
kind
of
of
all,
things?
I thought it was a cultural aspect, but you have those identities that you link to languages. There's like a language ideology that is built through your parents. And so my father was not very talkative, and and very introverted, and my mother was very extroverted. So I associated English or American to being more warm, and French to being more serious, academic, because my father was, quite even though he was a mathematician and not a philosopher, he was kind of a philosopher. And then in my teaching style, my students would tell me that I'm quite extroverted anyway, but my students would tell me that I was very different in English and in French. And so that probably there were two, but that was 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And I think that now the two styles have merged more or less. But so that's one difference that's associated to language. In terms of culture, well, I've always felt that it was easier to to speak to others when I went to the States. There was like, if you're in a bus, much less than in Brazil, but a little bit more than in France. If you're in a bus, if you're in the subway, if you walk in the street and you need help, in the States, people are there and they help you. Maybe it's not easy to create deep relationships, but at the surface, people are very helpful, talkative, and you can just go on the metro in New York, maybe not right now with the masks, but usually, and you can start speaking to your neighbor, which was not, it's absolutely not the case in France. It's just
Yes.
so, those are kind of differences that were there when I was a kid.
Okay. And does your mother speak English with your children, or do
So now she
they?
does. When my children were little, she tried speaking English, but they would not answer because they didn't know enough English yet. So she switched to French. And now that they both speak English, especially my daughter, well, not both, because my son speaks and writes to her in English as well. So now we speak English with her in whatever circumstance, except if there's a person there who doesn't understand English.
Mm-hmm.
So there were the years when they were growing up, she spoke French to them, but now she's speaking English.
And do you try to bring any aspects from the United States to your children, or this is not necessary for them?
Well, it's very different in their generation than it was in mine because of internet and because, so they get a lot of the culture like the other young people, and they find it themselves. But I think that they got a lot from my mother. She was a very important figure in their lives. So it was always there, and from my family, my American and Israeli family.
Yeah, maybe that's why they wanted to learn. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
English. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And when you went to school, when you were a child, do you remember if there was any problem with I don't know, having English and French together?
So when I was really little, in kindergarten, in nursery school, like a baby, I was very, very shy, and I wouldn't speak. And even until, I don't know what it is in Brazil, but first grade, even second grade, the teachers would tell my mother that they didn't know me because I didn't speak. And I remember that in the courtyard, I would be sometimes I would mix languages, and my friends would make fun of me, my classmates would, because they didn't understand where English was not as popular as it is now. So it was not accessible to other kids. I think that now it would be very different. It's more of a valued language now.
Yeah.
So I felt a little bit like the kids who have another language at home, but when it's not a prestige language. Well, now I think things are very different. And I became much more talkative when at the end of high school. And I became used to my dual identity.
Yes. It's difficult for children, yes, to deal with this.
I think it's also a matter of personality. Also, I did a lot of theater, which helped me, theater in French. So it helped me overcome that kind of shyness I had, which nobody could guess anymore. Nobody would think that I was a shy child. My sister was the one who was very extroverted.
Yeah. And Aliyah, you said, well, you speak two languages that are prestige languages. So maybe you haven't faced anything like that. But do you believe that until now society judges people that speak more than one language, or do you think it depends on the language?
So first of all, yes, I think it depends on the language. And in this generation, in a country like France, if you're bilingual with English, or Spanish, it's very much valued, and it's not the same if you speak Tamil or Turkish, or because it's not as valued. But I think that things are changing, and that at least the upper middle class, for sure, but even the middle class is realizing that it's incredible to speak several languages, and that it's valued. I think things are changing. It used to be very difficult in France. France was a very monolingual country, and we have those laws that everything should be in French. So you're not really supposed to use English in your French, or you always have to find the French word. It's even worse in Quebec, but in France, it's pretty important. Even though you have whole domains like marketing, all kinds of domains in which you have a lot of English words that are pronounced with a French accent. So I think really, really that things are changing. I hope not just for English, but also for other languages. That it used to be like 15 years ago, teachers were told that they had to tell parents to speak French with their kids and not be plurilingual. And I think that little by little, they're understanding that they should encourage parents to transmit their own culture and language to their children.
Yeah, because this will be good for them, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Aliyah, thanks a lot for spending your time with us and talking to us about your family multilingual environment. It was a pleasure. Bom, esse foi mais podcast Famílias Bilíngues do grupo Gealim de Araraquara. E este foi o Famílias Bilíngues, podcast promovido pelo Gealim, grupo de estudos em aquisição da linguagem da Unesp de Araraquara, em parceria com o Programa Institucional de Internacionalização CAPES-Print.